Buckminster.
Welcome to the Art of Conscious Living. Today I have a very special guest, Pat Ravasio. She's the biographer of Buckminster Fuller, a great American visionary. He died in 1983, and we have so much to talk about of this incredible man of great vision, great wisdom. He was the most earliest American environmentalist. So Pat, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
How are you today?
Great. It's fun to be here.
So we have a lot to talk about, and his nickname, he's known as Bucky. And he was an incredible man who had an incredible life and a hardship at the very beginning when he was a child. So let's go to the very beginning of his early childhood.
Okay, so he was born with very bad vision. And it's kind of ironic that he would become this great visionary. But in other ways it makes sense because he couldn't see, he had to rely on his other senses. And so his intuition grew, and he started to do things by feel and by touch. And he even said he had a great sense of smell. And in kindergarten, the teacher gave them all, this was before he got his glasses, because in that time you went to kindergarten when you were 4, and he got his glasses when he was about 5. And they gave out peas and toothpicks and said, build something. And all the other children built these typical little cube structures mimicking the houses and buildings that were in their little town in Massachusetts. Well, Bucky, working by feel, started with a triangle. And then he started adding triangles to that triangle. And before you knew it, he had created something that is now referred to as the octet truss, which if you've been to Larkspur Landing and you see the roof there that's all built out of triangles, that was the structure that Bucky actually created then, and it was the strongest structure that can be created in nature. And as time went on, in the 1920s, Bucky would go back to this triangle after he'd had a very terrible he nearly committed suicide. In 1927, his daughter had died of pneumonia in their house on the East Coast. And at the same time, he'd been out traveling around, telling the world how to build better buildings. And here he couldn't even protect his own daughter from pneumonia that she got because she lived in this drafty old apartment. So he nearly committed suicide. He rescued himself from that when a voice came to him. He was out on the harbor in Chicago, Montrose Harbor, where I used to live, which is where I met him, and he told me this story himself, that a voice came to him and said, you have no right to take a life. And he realized that he couldn't even complete his own suicide. So he felt like a total loser, and he went back home and took a vow of silence. He wasn't going to be this gadabout anymore, talking about all of his great ideas. He shut himself down for 2 years. And during that time, he went back to the basics. Now, for you and I, that would mean exercise, good food, diet. For him, it meant, let's start with the universe. Let's start with what are the basic building blocks of nature. And he got back to that triangle, which he knew somehow was important. And the geodesic dome, which is his greatest, the invention that he is most known for, which he actually sort of co-invented. There had been people who had created domes before, but he was the first one who took these triangles and built them out until they eventually turned into this dome, which was the way to encompass the maximum amount of space with the minimum amount of resources. And the triangle was the basis of all that.
So his idea was to think about principles, universal principles that could contribute towards what could create more for less. And it was all about his sustainability and caring for the environment. And he thought about that greatly.
Right. And starting in about 1940, he began to call for us to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. He said to keep burning fossil fuels is like burning up the house to keep the family warm. And it was a lot of that talk that got him into trouble, because obviously the big industrialists and the fossil fuel industries did not want to hear this great well-known man who was getting thousands of people to come and listen to him talk. He was like a Mick Jagger in the 60s and 70s. He literally could fill a huge auditorium with people who would come and listen for hours and hours and hours. He would talk forever.
And what was his idea? Instead of being oil dependent and fossil, what was he advocating?
Well, he had followed the work of Nikola Tesla, who preceded him back in the 1800s, and he believed that Tesla was onto something about the fact that there's energy everywhere. But whether you get to, that sort of free energy of the electromagnetic field and using gravity and all those sort of obscure energies, which we now know are out there but may be difficult to tap, he was just talking about the sun. From 1940, he was saying that there was every day on this earth 3,000 times the solar energy needed to power the earth. In one day, we got 3,000 times the solar energy we needed to power every human activity on earth for a year. That all we had to do was tap it. And he was calling for this solar technology to be developed as early as 1940. And now we watch, and in California now, it's about 2 to 3%, and we're the leading state. And solar technology is catching on, and it's starting to be developed, and the fossil fuel industry is having a harder and harder time shutting it down because it's becoming obviously a better solution. But yet to this day, the fossil fuel industry receives over $40 billion a year in subsidies from the US government to keep the costs of oil and gas down. And when Obama wanted to spend $5 billion to support alternative energies, it was a huge, big deal.
Yes.
So we still haven't done it.
Pat, I quote Bucky. One of his sayings is, if you want to have change, don't put your energy to the negative. Create something that is going to be positive and different, and then the old will die off on its own because it will become obsolete.
Right. And that's what's really happening with fossil fuels, but the fact that our government sort of got into bed with the corporations on this is making unnatural forces at work. I mean, you see the activities now with fracking and the tar sands. These are increasingly desperate efforts to get the last fossil fuels up out of the ground, and it is a dying industry. But there's a question as to timing now. Buckminster Fuller said in 1982 that humanity was entering its final examination, that we would determine within the next, well, he said 10 years at the time, but so luckily we've had a little more time than that we would determine whether or not humanity was going to be a successful experiment of nature based on how we handled this energy and environment issue. So the time is pressing now. With the increase in carbon now to 400 parts per million, which just happened, where the 350.org was, the 350 was supposed to be the tipping point for the environment in terms of carbon. We're now at 400. So it's becoming really urgent and pressing, and that's why I am working now full-time to bring back Bucky's ideas related specifically to this, because I want people to know that this isn't a new idea, that all this talk about climate change and global warming has been discussed since 1940, and it's only because industry comes and buys up these patents and buys up the technologies. They bought out Tesla. JP Morgan invested millions of dollars to help Tesla get his free energy system off the ground and then pull the plug right at the last minute, because they haven't found a way to meter the sun or meter the wind. So while we want to be positive and while we want to focus individually on our own abilities to evolve consciously, which Buckminster Fuller talked about, We also need to deal with the reality that the game is fixed against us right now. And people need to, as Bucky called for them to do, understand the truth, think the truth, and then speak the truth, and dare to demand what really needs to be done.
Well, I'd like to bring this into the conversation that the grandson of Henry Ford has now taken over the Ford company, car industry. And for 20 years, as a young man, he was an early environmentalist himself. So he was talking to the corporates who were the good old boys who ran the Ford company a certain way. And they basically told him to shut up. They did not. They said, we're going to do the status quo, the minimum, to run this company, to please the environmentalists. And that's the way it is. So we don't want to hear anything of your nonsense about your environmental stuff. Well then, in 2008, the whole thing of the car crash, the industry, the Wall Street, and the housing, now they're listening to him big time, because their whole company is, the livelihood of the company, the stability of the company is based on that now, where now they're listening to him. He's the head of the company now, the grandson, and he is now competing with Toyota for all of the...
Against the Leaf and some of those great high-energy cars.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's all about the high energy and the hybrid cars and all that. So now they're listening to him, because they know that if they don't listen to him, then there's no hope. So my point being here is that everything in its own time. What is the point in trying to go against something and being an activist out there and saying, if it's not the right time? Where for 20 years they told him to literally shut up. They did not want to listen to him. But now they're listening to him fully, head on. They're listening to him. Why are they listening to him now? Because it's the right time now. Because everything in the last 4 years...
There is a shift underway. That's very clear that there is a shift underway.
So that's the point I want to make here, that you have to take into accountability of which time and place and energy and all of the history behind you. And is it ready to be listening to that? Is it ready to be implemented?
I'm seeing so many signs. So I've been involved with, ever since I got back involved with Bucky, so I spent 2 days alone with him in 1982. And he decided, he called me an empty vessel, which of course at the time I was highly insulted because I was a 20-something smarty pants and thought I knew everything. And he sat me down for 2 days and he told me all of this about fossil fuels and about energy and how he was being marginalized and how his ideas were being subverted because they didn't want to go along.
It was not the right time.
Right. At 1982, it wasn't the right time. And he was talking to young people at the time because he knew that he was smart enough to be a good visionary, and he knew that at about the time that I would be at this age and be able to speak my mind and read and understand and know that it would be the right time. And so I don't want to even focus on the evils of fossil fuel. What we need, and somebody wrote it beautifully the other day, I think it was Bill McKibben, wrote about how we need new metaphors. And the idea of a clean energy world, that's where we need to embrace the beauty of that right now. And you talk about conscious living, and Bucky talked about being evolving consciously evolving. If we get into a clean energy world where we're tapping the sun and the wind and the waves and geothermal and all those things, we're no longer going to have to labor every day to buy our energy supply. Energy will be almost free, if not totally free. And as Bucky said, grass does not pay for the rain. Fish don't have to buy their sunshine or water. Why does the most sophisticated life form on the entire planet have to labor hours and hours every day so that they can buy the gas to drive their cars, to get to work, to earn the money, to pay for their energy? So it's about embracing the beauty of the world that is long overdue, that could have been here in the 60s and 70s. We were on our way, I'm sure you remember, in the 60s and 70s, there was this great environmental wave of love for the earth and for this new age of Aquarius. And then it got shut down and it got quiet. And I do this analogy when I present to young children of this big, beautiful geodesic dome. And then I do a slow dissolve to the disco ball. And I show how during that time, what happened to make us lose sight of the world that could be, and instead accept the world that our corporate environment was serving up to us.
Well, Pat, let's clarify that. When you say what happened to us, is it really us as the people of the nation, or is it the industrial and the corporate government? So there's two things going on here, where we're in the industrial age in the last 100 years, and that industrial age is being played out now. It's coming to the end, but they don't want to go away anytime soon because they've been making a lot of money from all of this. The Hunts, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and there's
the Kochs.
Yes, and a lot of money is
new
invested
guys.
in all of that, of oil dependency and fossil fuel. All of these things we're talking about, and as Mr. Fuller was talking about many decades ago, it wasn't the right time. But he implemented it, and he was also, as you said, he was talking to young people so they could pick it up in the future as the visionary he was.
And that future's now.
And the future is now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a very exciting
where
time.
the doorway is being opened. The crack up of the door is just being opened right now, and we have to keep that into our vision here and into our mind, that we have to look back at history, we have to look back and know where we're at the present time and look at the vision ahead.
Right.
It's no sense of complaining about what is, where, again, the example of Ford.
Right.
For 20 years. I mean, basically...
Understanding what happened in the government and what happened in society from the 70s to the 80s and 90s is something that I've looked a lot at. And I would say that it's you can't separate and say, oh, well, the government did that, but the people did this. It was all part of, we're like one organism. You know, the human beings on planet Earth, as Bucky always said, were actually an organic entity in and of itself. So it's all working in together. But what did happen, there was a turning point in 1979 when the first oil crisis happened. And Jimmy Carter, I don't know if you remember this, he gave this heartfelt speech about how we were dealing with a crisis of conscience and a crisis of self-confidence in our country, and we needed to take on this energy thing, and we were going to need to sacrifice, and we were going to need to turn down our thermostats and carpool and drive less. And he was running at the time against Ronald Reagan, who came along and said, I want to tell you the 9 scariest words in the English language. Do you remember this joke? It was a great Ronald Reagan joke. The 9 scariest words of the English language. You're sitting on your couch one night, and the doorbell goes, and you answer the door, and there's a nice enough looking gentleman there who says, I'm here from the government. I'm here to help you. And with that, he got Americans thinking that government was the problem. The government was too big. The government just needed to get out of the way and let America be free. So if our government got out of the way, basically what they were doing was starting to pull the blocks out of our democracy. And they dismantled the EPA. He took the solar panels off the White House. He cut the EPA's budget by 1/3. He brought in all these new conservative think tanks to help craft legislation that would be good for business. So there was a very decisive history that needs to be understood in order to know where you are now, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes again at this precious time, which may be our last chance. You got to understand history. And you have to understand, and I want young people to understand, that this didn't just all sort of evolve and, oh, we never got around to solar power because it was too expensive or because it wasn't practical. It was because we didn't invest in it. And we didn't invest in it because there were people who made money if we didn't. And a lot of those patents got bought up and then put under. So where we are now, history, I don't want to be, there's a lot of people out there who have an axe to grind. I don't have an axe to grind. I have a vision to share. I have Buckminster Fuller's vision to share of a clean energy world, how it's totally doable. And that gets to what you brought up earlier, which was so good about the doing more with less. Buckminster Fuller said there was abundance for everybody. We could have enough to feed and clothe everybody. We had it. It was there. We just had to focus on it. We just had to make that our goal. And we haven't done it.
So what would you recommend that we do right now in alignment with Bucky, what his work was all about?
Well, I guess take time to sort of understand where we are right now. But I was thinking this just the other day when I was on Facebook, and I thought, Bucky would have loved Facebook and Twitter because he was all about connecting. And he had this vision that we would eventually all just be able to think it. He had this famous line that he would say, we will eventually just be able to think it, and that will be our vote. And when he said that to me, I thought, boy, he's getting old. He's getting a little, crazy. And now I look at Facebook and Twitter and I realize, look what happened with the Susan G. Komen Foundation when they said that they, when they took undesirable social positions. Facebook came out and it was this huge wave of social pressure that made them get in line. Same with the Boy Scouts. Same that's happening with Monsanto now. There's this huge backlash. So I see it happening. And so I would say get on Facebook.
That's what happened in Egypt.
Oh yes, that was social media
Facebook
that brought that about.
Yes.
So take the time. I always say to the kids, every day, brush your teeth, comb your hair, speak your mind. Get out there and let your elected officials know. And just because you can't vote, it doesn't mean you can't influence somebody else's vote. So, and this is where I kind of don't go along with Bucky because he thought politics were obsolete. He thought we shouldn't bother with politics at all. But I guess once Facebook is running the world, we won't have to. I don't know.
So what is your most important, that's dear to your heart about Bucky Fuller? Of what his work was all about and his vision? Besides being the activist he was?
Well, if I had to name one thing, it was so strange when you think about it because he was such an intellectual. I mean, his synergetic geometry is transforming physics to this day. The Buckminster Fullerene was this little carbon molecule that was discovered in 1986 and won the Nobel Prize for Science because it was the most significant finding, and he actually predicted this exact little building block of nature. And now there's physicists who say that that's how life came to Earth, was in these little C60, carbon-60 molecules. If you Google Fullerene, you'll find it's like there's a whole world of scientists talking about this.
And he was awarded 28 of his patents.
Patents and books and honorary degrees, but you know what it all came down to? Mm-hmm. He was the one guy in that realm, the Einsteins, Leonardos and all that, who talked about the power of love. He talked about how in order for us to evolve, we each as individuals needed to have this sense of love for all humanity. And that's what I think he had. And that's why he was so intense and so determined to share what he thought was wisdom that would help humanity survive.
Well, let's define what kind of love he was talking about.
Well, he defined love as metaphysical gravity. That was his words for love. And I love that. And at first I thought, okay, I get the metaphysical. In Les Miserables, they say to fall in love is to see the face of God. And that relates to this otherworldly experience of connection. But gravity, You think gravity's what makes my face wrinkle more than your face somehow. We need to figure out why the gravity's doing that. But gravity, you think it pulls you down. But as Bucky put it, there is no up and there is no down. There's only in and out from the Earth's core to the universe. And gravity, with its opposing centrifugal force, is simply what keeps things coming back together and connecting. So metaphysical gravity is love. It makes, I don't know, it makes perfect sense to me. I've given it some thought, but so he loved nature. He thought that our disconnection with nature was a real problem, that children don't spend enough time out in nature, and so they grow up believing that human beings are separate from nature, whereas we are only nature and we are subjected to nature's rules, and if we don't follow nature's rules, she'll just flick us off like so many dodo birds,
Right.
you know, if we don't play along.
Well, he seems to have that in common with a lot of the other great thinkers. Frank Lloyd Wright respected nature. Emerson, a great thinker, writer.
Yeah, Henry
So
David
they
Thoreau.
always had this great reverence and great respect for nature. As Frank Lloyd Wright said, God was maybe questionable, but his God was nature.
I love that. See, to me, if I could rule the world, I would say, let's get rid of all the religions and let's just make nature be our God. Because that's the only really actual, if you take all of the sayings about God and put the word nature in instead, you realize you're dealing with actual facts. Nature is everywhere.
And what was Mr.
Nature
Fuller's
knows all.
thought on religion?
He thought that at the time he thought that the youth of all humanity was totally breaking down all organized religions, all sovereignties. He didn't believe that nations should be separate from one another. He was famous for calling us, he coined the term spaceship Earth. He thought of us as one united spaceship Earth, united planet spaceship Earth, and wanted everyone to realize who you were on this. You were just a little speck on this huge.
And that we're all interconnected.
Exactly.
Humanity.
He was the first one world global thinker. He had these plans for electric grids that would connect the whole world. And in doing so, if we just did that, and they were all solar powered, then the sun coming in on the bright side of the Earth could still be giving power to the dark side of the Earth, because there was so much extra power to go around. And there's actually still scientists working on that. So he has an amazing reach in so many fields, and it's all going on now. Architecture, design, there's a whole field of biomimicry, which you may have heard of, you know, that is all about. Biomimicry is using nature's design principles. The way probably the best example is how the guy created Velcro, was when a burr stuck on his pants and he pulled it off and he looked at it and he said, wow, that might make a good fastener. And now they're using butterfly wings, which are actually solar power receptors, and they have little some of these, not all butterflies, but this certain yellow butterfly has these little shingles on its wings. And each one of those shingles receives solar power. So they're learning to take that technology and put it onto solar panels, which makes them that much more efficient. So there's all kinds of things happening where scientists are studying nature to learn how to make things better. It's a really exciting time.
So would it be fair to say that he was born with all of this great vision and great wisdom? Or, I mean, was nothing in his environment or his home upbringing or his schooling that helped him to form this way of being this great visionary that he was?
Well, definitely not schooling. He got thrown out of Harvard. He was a big partier in college. He didn't like traditional education and thought that they were just trying to wrote information into his head. And
so he had this indomitable, strong vision and spirit that he came in with.
I think so. I mean, his great aunt was Margaret Fuller. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she was known. She's actually I love this. She's known as the first feminist. Now, the word hadn't been created yet. She was called a transcendentalist, and she was friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson, and they had their little salon meetings, and they would get together and talk about the nature of the human soul and the oversoul and the relationship to nature. And if she had been around in the 1700s, she probably would have been burned at the stake for being a witch, because she was extremely spiritual, and and she was his great aunt. So I think not only did she influence him, but I think he had part of her, whatever that genetic structure is that makes some people just a little more intuitive, a little more in tune with the real energies of the universe, which not all of us connect with as well.
So he died in 1983. Before he died, what was he doing the previous last decade of his life?
Oh, he was so busy. He had, I think the last number I read was that he had circumnavigated the globe, I don't know, 300 times, speaking all over the world. Up until the very last day that he lived, he was still speaking at these conferences, and everything from like mental health to architecture to science, medicine. He called himself a comprehensivist, and he really was. And so he would get invited, and he couldn't turn down an invitation because he loved to talk. And so he would go and he would talk, but his wife of 67 years had fallen ill and was in a coma in Los Angeles, where they were living. And he went to see her, and they didn't think that she was going to emerge from the coma. And she had always told him that she was afraid to go first, because she didn't want to get to wherever it was that you go and not find him there. And so he was sitting there at her bedside, and witnesses who were there say that he suddenly shouted out, "She's squeezing my hand." And at that very moment, he had a massive heart attack, and he died on her bed right there in the hospital. And then she died within the next day, and they were buried together. So it's funny, because the eulogist wrote and said that he lived such a conscious life that he even appeared to have chosen his own moment of death through his own conscious choice. He wanted to be there for her on the other side.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah.
What books has he written, or what has he left behind in writings?
Well, I would say if somebody wants to get kind of the basics on Bucky, first of all, his writing is really hard to read, because when he spoke, it was just like you and I talking, and he knew he had to say it in a way that we would understand. So he was easy to understand.
I read that about him, that he had
but his writing,
way of writing that was long. And
his writing, he would go back. He wanted to be so precise that he would go back, and he would edit and edit and edit, and clarify and clarify and clarify. And then he would find out, oh, there's no word in English for what I'm trying to say, so I'm going to make one up. So if you read a lot of his words aren't even in the dictionary. He'll come up with these like obtusenal, directional words, and you just... So I would say if you want to learn about Bucky, there's a really slim volume called Guinea Pig B, which is about how he lived his life as an experiment to see what one human being could do if he set out to work on behalf of all humanity. And it's called Guinea Pig B. It's a little thin book, and he wrote it, I think, for normal people. He wasn't trying to get through to the scientists and the architects, like in some of his books, where he was really, and the policymakers, where he was really trying to quantify and get into the science. And if you want probably the seminal work that most people point to is his book Critical Path, which was about the critical path for humanity. My favorite is one called Utopia or Oblivion, Prospects for Humanity. And that's the one where he just gets right down to it about what it's going to take for human beings to be a successful experiment of nature and evolve to the next level, and what's in our way, and how we can sort of push that out of our way and make that next evolutionary leap.
You made an incredible point moments ago where you said that there's no separate between the government and the people. And today a lot of people are feeling there is that. So that could be ill thinking right there and wrong thinking, or in the sense where it could be best not to be thinking like that. If you think like that, then you're against something. So just create something that is better than thinking like that.
But I guess,
and the
call to deal with the truth. I mean, I love when I hear about people going off the grid and going back to a very organic way of life.
Back to basics.
And reducing their carbon footprint, which, by the way, California's carbon footprint is now the third lowest per capita per individual in the United States. California is doing great on that. Bucky loved California for a lot of reasons, but that would have been one of them, how we've really started to take control of emissions and all those kinds of things.
And how have we done that in California?
Well, the auto emissions standards were a huge thing, and now it looks like the EPA under Obama is talking about copying California and making those emission standards applicable nationwide. We enacted cap and trade starting last year with the new Democratic legislature in Sacramento.
Cap and trade?
Yeah, where carbon is now being taxed and where people can trade off their carbon offsets. So they're putting a price on what the actual cost is to people. In economics, they refer to it as an externality. And it means that they're taking into account the real impacts of using fossil fuels, not just the fact that it's $4 a gallon, but what's the real cost to the world of using fossil fuels? And Washington just a few days ago just repriced carbon to make it a lot more expensive, which means that all of the legislation that comes out of Washington is going to reflect this new reality. I mean, it's not a new reality, but it's a new recognition of reality that fossil fuel is a lot more expensive in its real cost to society.
More of a true
than what's
value.
Being trumped. Exactly.
Yes.
So no, I don't want to sound negative. I don't believe that we should fight government, although there are times when I've said to my husband that I really want to get arrested just to say that I've actually done something more than read and think and write and talk. But he reminds me that can be expensive.
Yeah. So that's the Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, he's
arrested a lot. And Dale Hannah.
Daryl Hannah is doing
the actress,
right.
Where he's an environmentalist.
Woody Harrelson's another one.
Yes.
And those people are important.
Times
those people are important because they say to everybody that it's okay to speak your mind and to take a stand. And I do think we need people to do that.
And to let people know. The reason they're doing this is basically to let others know what's really going on. Because he has, John F. Kennedy Jr. has children that are asthmatic. And they have these breathing problems. So therefore he cares deeply on a personal level about the environment. So he's out there saying that we need to become non-oil dependent. So he wrote an incredible manifesto and presented this to Obama at his first term. And that manifesto was absolutely right on, talking about the non-oil dependency and how to do that. But
yeah, there's a lot happening right now. It's good. There's a lot of good. It's strange to see it coming to such a head, though. I mean, I'm so happy to be alive at this time because you see the desperation of the industry to, you look at them building these huge pipelines to come all the way from Canada down to New Orleans so they can ship oil, the Keystone Pipeline, and the tar sands where they have to
fracking.
Decimate 8 miles and miles of land. And they're doing it because they can afford to do it, because the government supports them to do it still.
Yeah. And to me, it's a last desperate hope to make as much money as they could make right now. And
that was Bucky's great quote that made me lose sleep at night.
What is that?
And it was that it's hard to believe that for a few more measly profits during their few remaining years on earth, that they would be willing to forsake the future of all humanity. And I said, well, yeah, don't they have children too? Don't they have grandchildren? And you look at even the free market people who say, oh, the market should be allowed. Well, if you kill off your market, you can't. I mean, I can't get why it's not happening. It just seems like it has to happen now.
Yes. Well, Pat, you're in the process of writing a book about Mr. Fuller, and when do you hope that it would be published or have it?
Well, it's in the works. It's actually I've finished a full draft, and now I'm actually workshopping it through this wonderful program at UCLA. It's an advanced nonfiction writing workshop where you actually read each other's work, and there's a professor, and so I'm almost finished.
And the working title of the book is?
The Man in the Stars.
The Man in the Stars. Wonderful.
Yeah. And the book is about my experience with Buckminster Fuller, but what it's really about is the struggle of an individual in today's world to actually step up and take some responsibility and get involved. It's so easy to, do your job and go home and watch TV and see a movie and go to the clubs and have your friends and sort of keep the politics on the down low. But that courage to actually get involved and know that individuals can make a difference. That was his thing about, did I talk already about the trim tab, the idea of a trim tab?
No, you have not. But on that
Are we wrapping up?
Yeah, on that note.
Already?
Yes,
so fast? Oh
yes.
my God.
So we'll invite you back again, and we'll talk further.
Great.
And when your book is out, we'll come back and invite you back.
Nice.
And we'll talk more about your book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been so nice. I hope I didn't talk your ear off.
No. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
I feel like we've just barely scraped the surface.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Pat. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you, Victoria. It's really nice to meet you.
And from the Art of Conscious Living, do take care of yourselves and take care of others.